Welcome back, everyone, to our second interview with Joy Olsen. I'm Carly Dalton, and with me is Brooke Klontz, and our mission is to equip writers with the tools necessary to become a successful author. Joy Olsen is the author of Root Petal Thorn and Where the Sweet Bird Sings, and her new book, Birdie and Jay, is available exclusively on Audible. So Ella, why don't you tell us a little bit about query letters and what should be in them and kind of the whole gist on query letters?
Okay. All right. For those of you who don't know, a query letter is a letter that you would send to a literary agent to have them take a look at your work. And I don't know a single agent that doesn't require a query letter up front. And then oftentimes they'll have you attach maybe like 10 pages of your manuscript with the query letter. It's so important because agents get, they call it a slush pile, which is basically just a stack of query letters. I mean, it's a virtual stack, it's an email stack nowadays, but of query letters. And so if you can capture their attention quickly, then they're more likely to ask for the rest of your book, and then your story itself can stand on its own. When I was trying to query, and it took me quite a while to get an agent, I actually worked for a literary agency as a remote reader of the queries. So this literary agent had about, I'd say maybe about 6 people who would read the query letters. She had laid out a kind of a basis of what she was looking for. And then I would read those query letters and I would get, and then sometimes if I liked it, then I would go on to the rest of the submission, which was about 5 pages. And if passed my test, then it would go on to the agent. So I kind of got good at like being able to spot a good query letter, which was, I think, was helpful for myself in my own querying process. So I'll just put this out here also, is I do teach a query boot camp, and I'm going to just say it right now because I don't teach it all the time, usually only once a year, but I teach it through the University of Utah through their lifelong learning, and the query class is going to start in April. So you would just register through there. Okay, so awesome. Say that again.
I said I've taken it. It's awesome. If you're in Utah, highly recommend it.
Thanks. Okay, so so a query letter is basically you have to do a few things to let your agent know what you're writing. So first up, you need to know the genre of your book. And that basically means like where your book would be on maybe like a library shelf, or what it would be next to. And there are broad-based genres. So you could say, oh, well, it's women's fiction or young adult fiction or whatever, but within those there's like subgenre. So it might be like young adult romance, or it might be upmarket women's fiction, which would be like book club fiction, which was what I write, or historical fiction, or it could be like Regency romance, which is entirely different. It has it's written during the Regency period, like the Jane Austen period, and then typically would have like a romantic component. So romance has a whole different promise. So you kind of have to know what your genre is. You put that in, and then of course you need to know your word count. Agents look at word count to determine whether or not you've written something that is the proper length to sell, and that it's not too short, and it's also not too long, meaning you haven't fleshed out your story, or you haven't edited it well enough to make it a concise story. And they kind of have, and you can look up those word counts for your particular genre online. I know that there's always somebody who's like, well, but I mean, take a look at the Harry Potter books or something, and they're so long. Well, the only reason that they're so long is she already had a following. But if you look at her first book, it was right within the word count. And then she was able to just push that out. Same with Stephen King has the same situation. Nobody's really editing his work. And frankly, I think that some of his books should be edited a little bit more closely because it'd be a tighter story. Anyway, you need those things. And then you need something called, people call it a log line, or that's what I call it. And it is basically the gist of your story in 1 sentence, 1 to 2 sentences. And it has 3 components, primarily 3 components, which is the character, and not just the character's name, but what makes them special or defines them more so than their name. So You know, it might be like a teen on the run from, you know, an evil step parent, or it might be a soccer mom who is suffering or going through a divorce or something like that. So you've got your character, and then you have their basically what they want. So it could be they want to find the ring and save the world, or it could be that they want to save their failing marriage, or whatever. They want something, and then what's stopping them from getting it. So those three things, and that would be the conflict. And there could be several parts of conflict, and also conflict can be not just like an antagonist. So I know that YA fiction oftentimes, or fantasy or science fiction, will often have an antagonist that's like a bad guy. But sometimes it can be an antagonist. You could think of it as an antagonistic force. So like it could be making it through the war, or or braving a sea voyage, or, you know, those kinds of things. So you could have an antagonistic force that's not just like a bad guy. And then you can add a few things in there to give it a little bit more definition. So it could be, you know, you could talk about maybe like they call it a ticking clock, which is like they have to do all of this, and, you know, before the war is over, or before midnight, or whatever. Anyway, and then so that's you work from that, the basic gist of your story, and then you add voice. And of course the story should, or the query should reveal, or should reflect the voice of the book that you have written. Even if you're not writing like in your, so say you have written your book in first person, your query letter is not in first person, it's in third person, but it's still the language and kind of the punchiness of the voice should be reflected in the query letter. So, and you'll write so many query letters before you get the right one. So it's good to just give yourself, you know, some flexibility to just kind of keep massaging it and working through it. And in my class, we kind of work on like trying to come up with our best version of that, and then you'll probably continue to query more after that too. So, or to continue to refine your query letter as you actually send queries to agents.
So one question I have for you, actually, I read somewhere that you should send out a few queries, and then if you get rejected, tweak your query a little and send out more. Would you recommend doing something like that?
For sure, yeah. I would never send out all your query letters all at once. I would you do them in small groups, and if you get some positive feedback, you know you're probably doing great. If you get nothing back, you probably need to tweak it, and then try it again with another small group. You know, you only get one at bat with sending query letters to the agents, so you want to, you know, take it slow and make sure you don't, you know, basically destroy all your chances all at one time. So
would you recommend like waiting for the agents that you really want to query later, or should you query them first?
I would recommend starting with some that you don't want as much, that you're maybe neutral on, because if you send it to a bunch of agents that maybe aren't top on your list, but you get this overwhelmingly positive response, you know you've got something, right? So that's when you immediately send a query letter to your favorite agent, and you say something like, this book, this query, or this manuscript is already under review by several agents, or something like that. So you not only get a hold of those favorite agents, but you also let them know that there's other interest, which will of course pique their interest. I mean, that's the thing about, you know, they almost are like, oh, well, if it's a proven thing, well, then I better take a quick look at this thing. So yeah, I would recommend starting, especially initially, with just kind of those like, I feel neutral about this agent. And then do some of your favorites, and then do some of your less favorites, and kind of, you know, bounce around there. And a lot of times you're not going to know who your favorites are. I mean, you may have heard of a couple of them, but there's so many that it's, you know, it's hard to know exactly. I mean, of course you will know some bigger literary agencies, but you may not know the agents within them either. not specifically. So I always just say, keep querying.
Keep querying.
Yeah.
That's really good advice.
Ella, can you tell us kind of about how important that first chapter is and what all goes into that very first chapter?
Yeah. So the first chapter, again, is something that will be read more than any other portion of your book, especially during the query time, because you'll only be able to send it, or you'll only be able to send a short bit to your agents. Typically, they'll ask for 5 pages to 25 pages, and that is going to be your maybe even just a portion of your first chapter. So it's important to be sure you get your voice out there first and foremost, and then you're the voice of your character, not you as the author. But also you should hope that you have an inciting event, or first a hook to make the person change, go to the next page. And that can be lovely writing, but it can also be something that happens that's like, oh, remarkable. Like, the classic would be like a murder mystery and the body is found or whatever. And so, that's described particularly well. And then the inciting incident is what makes your character enter the story. And all those things would typically happen in a first chapter. That doesn't mean that you're going to send all of those to the agents, because it might not be within your word count, but it should happen pretty close to that. Also, when your book is published, people oftentimes will pick up and read the first page. And by first page, I mean like the half page that is the first page of your book, and will decide whether or not they're going to continue to read it based on that. They'll pick it up, they'll look at the cover. So the cover will appeal to them. Then they'll flip it over, read the back. If something catches their fancy, like maybe they're particularly interested in Paris, and this takes place in Paris, they'll be like, oh, okay, well, let's see. And then they'll flip through and they'll find that first page, and they'll be like, oh, okay, I'm interested in this book or not. Anyway, so yeah, it's important, and you'll probably again rewrite that so many times, and you probably will start your story in different places as you work on and massage your manuscript. I know that I had 4 or 5 different start points for my especially for my first book, and then with my third one with Birdie and Jay, I definitely changed that around also, because it's with 2 voices, and I initially had started with one voice, and then I wanted to start with the other one. And anyway, yeah, it's a lot of work.
For sure. How can you feel as an author whether your first chapter is ready?
Have other people read it. I mean, I would say, especially if you're not asking somebody to read your whole book, because reading a full manuscript is a big ask, and that's why you get beta readers who you can trade with. But that's when you take your first chapter to your book club. Say you have a group of 10 people in your book club, and they're not going to read the whole thing for you and give you a bunch of feedback, but they might tell you what made them interested in it. And you have to ask really, you have to be pretty specific about, listen, don't just tell me you think this sounds great, because most of them, because they're your friends, are going to be like, oh, I think it's wonderful, and I'm so glad you're writing a book. What you want is for them to say, oh, right here, I'm engaged, or I'm not engaged at all, or whatever. So as many people as you can have kind of take a look at that first chapter, I would definitely do that. And then the rest of the book can be worked on by, your beta readers that are going to, or your editors or whatever, who are going to read the full thing. But since that first chapter is so important, plus, you might know that there's some weaknesses, but you might not know how to fix them. So you might go in with a set idea, and then you see, say you have 5 people read it and 3 people are like, oh, well, this was the problem, then there's something to it. If only one person, says it. In fact, I've got a group of, I have a writing crit group, and if there's only one of them, there's 4 of us that read, and if only one of them's like, oh, I had a problem with this, then I oftentimes, and the rest of them are like, oh no, I thought it was no big deal. I typically don't change that. But if a couple of them say it, I'm like, okay, maybe I need to rethink that part.
So one question I have for you, I've heard this a lot, that you should hire so you should do beta readers, hire a content editor, and then hire a line editor before querying. And I've heard line editor maybe for the first chapter or line editor for the entire book. Like, what would you recommend doing?
For sure, beta readers. And then it just depends on how well you catch your own line editing mistakes. My beta readers caught what needed to be caught. They don't, I don't think you need to hire that many. I think that you could get, you could get a content editor, and then you could also have an editor that helps you work through like the mechanics of writing if you're trying to, work through some of those details. So I think that the best thing you can do is actually read a lot, especially in your own genre, and kind of get a feel for like first chapters in several books that are bestsellers, and see what elements they have in there, and then pay special attention to, if you're working on some of the things like, where to put your quotes versus your, your commas and all those kinds of things. All you got to do is just read a couple of books and pay special attention to that. We read so quickly that you typically don't pick up on those things, but you will after you pay some special attention. So I would say you don't need to do that, but you absolutely should have several people read your full book, when you're done.
Would you recommend tools like Grammarly, or I'm trying to remember what the other one was called? Like online editing tools?
So I don't use Grammarly. My son uses Grammarly. He's not that much of a reader though. And so it really is helpful for him because those, it just doesn't come naturally to him. So Grammarly catches those things that if you don't read a ton, don't come naturally to you. So I don't find, I've run some of my things through Grammarly and haven't found that they were all that helpful, but I know it's a powerful tool. And so maybe it came out and I had just gone far enough in my career by the time that tool was available. And maybe when it was earlier in my career, maybe I would have used it with a little bit more intent. The tool that I do use to write is I write in Scrivener. And that's an important tool for being able to edit and find parts in your book and move things around and things like that. So you're not scrolling like you do in Word, scroll, and then cut, and then your page count changes, and then you're going back to paste it in, and it takes so long, and Scrivener just cuts through all of that. So I would highly recommend that tool.
Okay, time for one more question. Ella, do you have like one golden nugget that you found throughout your career, or like one golden piece of advice you can give writers or authors?
Gosh, I almost feel like we've kind of touched on it, in that it's just perseverance, and just try to enjoy the process, because even once you publish your book, then you're still going to have, you're still going to be, wanting to write another one, but also it doesn't mean that everybody's going to love your work. And so you have to develop that, the love of the process, and not dwell on not necessarily how your book is perceived and how you're rating against other authors in your genre and things like that. So kind of just get back to like the real basics of the passion for the writing itself. And that's what's going to keep you writing, and try to separate yourself from your perceived successes or failures. Have faith in your own work and your own joy in just simply doing it.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Ella. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Be sure to check out Ella's newest book, Birdie and Jay, available exclusively on Audible. And thanks for watching. Make sure to like, save, comment, hit the button to ring the bell so you'll be notified when our next video is up.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.